and welcome to Ep.4, where we're discussing quality culture and QMS. In this episode, I will be speaking with my colleague Steve about how pharma management may foster quality culture at the site level and how a site thinks about its quality management system in support of quality culture. Although corporate management likely directs or supervises sites in support of these matters, site management is still responsible for daily operations and continual improvement. Improving quality culture and the site quality management system, therefore, are both tasks that site management should be actively engaged in as a matter of quality management maturity. Steve, keeping track of all of the elements of improving quality culture at a pharma site can be quite the task. In your experience, what factors are considered essential to prioritize?
Well, Sarah, thank you for having me. Like I said, quality culture is kind of a passion to me for a while, and a couple things that I definitely, when I look at quality, employees need to hear, see it, and feel it, and that's where it really starts. And when you talk about like hearing and seeing it, we talk about like how do you set quality goals? How is a site doing quality performance? When it comes to management, how's that being communicated? How are you visualizing quality across the site? So that's a lot of the hear and feel, the or the hear and seeing. But on the feel side, when I look at shop floor employees, just need to have a strong understanding of the product, right? So it goes back to the product awareness, their education, the training, along with how do they kind of build that emotional connection to where how they can personally impact the product, the quality, and really understand how the patient could be impacted by the actions that they take when they produce it. So the other thing is also management really needs to be able to support their employees in allowing them to speak up when there's a quality issue. And that's some of the times that I think where a lot of leadership struggles on that because it's a different culture. So they need to build that, accountable culture along with blame free to where an employee could feel comfortable bringing things up if there's an issue.
Of course, that last aspect especially is absolutely important, creating that space where employees feel empowered to bring those concerns forward and not just keep them to themselves. But when employees do keep them to themselves, what are the factors at play preventing employees from championing quality culture within a site?
Well, one of the things first thing I always call it is poor leadership, and unfortunately that's where it all starts, right? Top down, and then sometimes there's also a lack of robust lean manufacturing and quality processes and systems in place. So if you look at like models like the shingle model, a lot of things look at tools, systems, and then that builds that culture and behavior. So they do go hand in hand. Also, a site becomes more tool driven and they're not looking at things from a system perspective. So they do things ad hoc or just tool based. And so they don't build the strong systems to be able to kind of develop that culture. Then the one of the other third things is the management just is not engaged with the shop floor. So that is one of the things that I've noticed with a lot of the assessments I've done in the past when I go to sites and talk to people and do focus groups that, management just isn't engaged. And you have to have that engagement if you're going to start building culture because shop floor employees have to be empowered to be able to say, hey, I need to stop the line if there's a problem and not be afraid that there's going to be retribution if they decide to stop or slow down production because of a quality issue.
Okay. So it seems then from the tool-driven perspective that they're focusing in too much on the tools and they're not then also taking into account the holistic nature of the whole system, and then they're also not engaged with employees specifically on the shop floor. Okay. And then when site managers and departmental heads are trying to then step away from those practices and actively improve their quality culture at the site, what best practices should they be considering?
Well, when first of all, whenever, like I said, through my experience with two multinational companies trying to install quality culture programs, one of the things that I focused on a lot with is building those systems and processes that allow to be able to really focus on four key behaviors. We want people to be courageous, to be accountable, to be aware, and to be patient focused. And so one of the things that, we talked a little bit about the courageous and accountable. a little bit earlier, but then when we look at aware, employees need to be understanding really how do they impact quality. And then on the patient focus side, what we look at is really the product awareness. So it's again knowing that in a regulatory environment, we really impact patients' lives. And so that's where understanding that connection to the patient, to the product, makes a huge difference. So anything you could do to that. And as I stated before, when we hear and we see and we feel quality, it changes a lot. So when you start looking at systems or trying to operationalize culture, things you need to do is focus on the communication, which I kind of said a little bit earlier about how things go on. Same with visual metrics. Do we understand what good is and what bad is, so that way we see it, so that way we could touch it. The project awareness I touched on a little bit, but then another one is the continuous quality improvement and compliance awareness. Where again, if you are in a good lean culture, you're always looking at continuous improvement, employee engagement, and empowerment. So then understanding it all turns into the compliance side once you're able to get good systems in place. And then lastly, a lot of things that I don't think it's as strong of an item, but it does play a factor, is what kind of rewards and recognition practices are in place for when there is someone who recognizes there's a quality issue, or is able to stop the line. Do we provide recognition for actually doing the right thing? And that's one of the things that I think we get so caught up in the operations side of, we've got to hit the numbers. We got to hit the numbers, which are important. We're still a business, right? Every company is a business, but at the end of the day, those products impact people's lives.
Yes, thank you, Steve. And that last part about how the products impact patients' lives makes me want to segue just briefly into a question regarding those key four behaviors. In your experience, were you noticing that any specific aspect of those four behaviors was especially more difficult for sites to wrap their heads around?
Well, it's funny, you say that, because I think some of it is, which is kind of strange, is the courageous piece. I think a lot of cultures, if there's not a really strong culture in place where there is empowerment and there's a good relationship with management, people sometimes just aren't courageous. And I think that's where probably if you look at the four key behaviors, people want to do the right thing. But in cases, if they don't feel the support structures there, they just become kind of, they withdraw. And unfortunately it impacts the product. And that's the piece that I think people struggle most. So it is important, because that courageousness really is built by management and how the leadership is and how they approach culture at a site.
Of course. I know we conducted our assessment for a pharmaceutical client. We noticed that the patient focus aspect was also a big issue.
Well, funny you mentioned that too, because that is another one that what we find sometimes is the training aspect. There's a lack of training. And in some cases, when things get tight, what's the first thing that usually gets cut is training. And so the sites that actually put a very good job and time and effort into like a mock setup or a training facility or so, where people can see the product, they can touch it, and they understand it more before they go on the floor, it makes a huge difference.
Excellent. Thank you, Steve. So then segueing a little bit in now into quality management system, how does the quality management system support quality culture?
It does quite a bit, because in a regulated industry like the pharmaceutical industry, a manufacturing site needs a really robust quality systems and processes, and those are all governed by the QMS. And so the effectiveness of those quality processes and systems will end up supporting a culture, a quality culture, a strong quality culture. One of the things that, for example, one of the things I like to, I think most people can relate to, is in most sites that I've been to, one of the first things people complain about or concern about is the lack of problem solving, effective problem solving. And if you look at a lot of issues that we have with our nonconformance or complaint handling system or processes, and even just troubleshooting day to day on the shop floor, up, though if you have a site has a strong culture in doing those things when it comes to problem solving, though they'll do better. You'll see a better performance in their CAPA system, and even, well, with the QMS, because the QMS does govern all those particular systems that support your problem solving. So that's one of the things that I find is really one of the biggest things, and also the biggest gaps that we saw over the years. That when I went to different sites, our problem solving capability just wasn't strong. But once they did a better job and focused on that, we did see the quality culture improve.
Okay. Yeah, that problem solving aspect is very interesting. And of course, it it ties into the fact that QMM, quality management maturity as a whole, is a very holistic system. So anything that you're doing in one particular practice area or one particular topic is going to have ramifications for other practice areas and other topics as well.
Absolutely.
I did want to talk a little bit more about your recent collaboration with CDRH and FDA to accelerate adoption of digital QMS technologies within the medical device and life sciences sectors. There was a digital transformation research study, and there were also two industry use cases on digital QMS and digital twins. What did you learn during those experiences, and how are these efforts anticipated to impact pharma site operations?
Well, one of the things that was remarkable about the study is he's going out and touching a lot of not only executives, but went after all the way different levels. So the survey was done with the perspective of engineers and support structures all the way up to executives and C-suite. So it gave us an opportunity to really get an understanding of what the pressure points that were being felt by these individuals. And then again, on some of the higher level C-suite people, we actually were able to talk and interview them to have a little bit more detailed discussion. But when the survey results came out of this, there were three things came up. There's the rate of return on investment, which is the ROI, the regulatory barriers, and the technology maturity. My conversation with people in the pharma industry, they agreed that they face the same challenges as the medical device and life sciences. So it's not a unique thing to one sector. It's really common across, I think, all the regulatory industry and probably other industries too. When I look at it, the two of those don't really surprise me as much because again, to digitally transform your processes, you create a lot of, you need a lot of capital to invest in that. So like every project or program that a company does, you have to have a good ROI to be able to get the return on, or be able to get the money or the capital to invest in that. So that didn't surprise me that that's number one. Everybody is always concerned, well, how do I present this, or how do I get these technologies in front of C-suite and be able to get them to provide the funding that we need to get that to happen. So that's an ongoing thing. There's also some companies that are working on trying to maybe calculate that out to help companies understand that. The other thing is the third one in there, the technology maturity. Again, talking to companies and with that survey to try to understand a little bit more into it, it kind of makes sense because when you look at, there's so much technologies out there, it's changing so fast that every site you go to or every company you go to, everybody is at a different level of maturity. And then the other thing that ties to that is the skill set. So if you decide to implement something like artificial intelligence or digital twin or digital thread, you also need the support structure for that. Not only the engineers to be able to generate and use that technology, but you've got the people who actually have to support the processes or the procedures or SOPs to be able to surround that and govern that as it ties to your QMS. The one thing I think surprised me the most was the regulatory barriers. And in my time, 2, 3 years with the Medical Device Innovation Consortium, I had time to spend time with the FDA, and we talked about this a lot to try to understand why regulatory barrier seems to be an issue at companies for keeping them from developing or implementing these systems or this transformation. And one of the things came up was that it's more of a perceived barrier and challenge and not a reality, because the FDA, and we've seen that with the pharma side and we've seen that with the med device side, the FDA is really working hard with the industry to kind of, how do we break those? How do we make it easier for these technologies to come in place? So a couple things that have recently been put out that I think has been across all sectors that are regulated by the FDA. You've got they put out guidance documents of the use of AI to try to give people some understanding. And then there's the computer software assurance guidance that came out to say, well, how do we validate now to try to change how we approach software and technology in relationship to risk, and not from the old paper base that we used to do. So that's the piece. And the FDA, the discussions I had with them was they're just as frustrated because they said, we look to industry, they're the experts. that are doing this stuff. So we're really looking to learn from them and how do we, what do we need to change in our process to make that work easier on the regulatory side? Unfortunately, we're in this. I guess it's more of a catch-22 where companies are still waiting, and especially on the quality side, wait on the FDA to kind of tell them what to do and which direction they're going. So it's one of those
Yes.
that and you'll probably see that when you deal with the QMN and assessments. It just it's changing that paradigm. How do we get past that? And there's so many programs now that the FDA has been trying to work with industry to kind of break through that. So those are kind of when it came to the research study. That was where it was a great. It was really interesting to see that what came out and everybody kind of where people stood on that.
Yes, and that's a good point, Steve, about sort of this mutual hesitation from both industry and FDA on moving on these technologies. Industry waiting for FDA, FDA waiting for industry. I observed a similar phenomenon when I was working on digital health technologies, and somebody has to move first if we're going to develop any useful best practices. And speaking of best practices, when sites are beginning to at least try to shift to best practices for their quality management system, what aspects would you recommend that they focus on or prioritize?
Well, the big thing, everybody's talking now about AI. That's the hot thing right now. Everything's AI, 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 right? So let's focus on that. Even though there's so many other technologies that we are looking at, like automated robotics is a huge one. The machine learning, digital twin and digital thread, where you're connecting everything together. And then with the digital twin, you've got the simulation to say, how do I avoid having to build a prototype and design? How do I model it? Or even if I build a new site, how do I now set it up digitally and look at variations of that instead of trying to have to draw it out, which takes time and stuff. But if no matter what you look at with the technology, one of the things that I saw, and especially in my discussions with so many companies that are going through this transformation, it is about data, right? And so every company is a little bit kind of all over the place when it comes to their data. And so the one of the things that I know a lot of consultants that are in the digital transformation side of things, they really saying you've got to have a good digital a data management plan. So that really starts with understanding, well, first of all, what data do I have? What do I really want to do with the data? So then that decides, okay, how does that connect? In this case, if we're talking about the QMS, how does that support the QMS? So it's a piece that you really have to understand. And even with the data, you see that it's not always good. And so you only get, garbage in, you're saying garbage in, garbage out. And that's where sometimes companies are struggling with. So as they kind of put their line in the sand and they decide, as we move forward, what processes should we put in place to maybe look at that data in a way to where we reduce the variation so we could kind of figure out what's good and what's bad. So if we start using that into making quality decisions, especially now with the use of AI, because there's some huge opportunities for AI within the regulated industry, that it's going to become more and more important that we have good data. So that's kind of, I think, the biggest thing that I think from what I've learned and talked to the people in the industry, data seems to be, you've got to have that data management plan.
Of course, that is a huge component of it, and then not just having the data and managing it appropriately, but then making decisions based on that data that make your not just your QMS, but anything else you may be investigating much more effective on the site level.
Well, absolutely.
Thank you, Steve, for your insights on this. This was a wonderful discussion and very good to demonstrate how these specific topics help to create an advanced pharmaceutical quality system, which is a crucial aspect of the FDA QMM initiative.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time with me. I'm glad to share all the insights I had and experience, and look forward to learning more of what you guys come up with further videos.
Thank you. And thanks everyone for listening. And if you found today's episode valuable, our other episodes and our QMM articles can be accessed on the Shabas Solutions website, where you can also explore our QMM services. Be sure to sign up for our newsletter and follow Shabas Solutions on LinkedIn to be notified of any future episodes and industry updates.